Welcome back to my 2022 NFL exit reports. And this should be a fun one. This is one of the Cincinnati Bengals, one of the really up and coming teams in the league. And I'm thrilled to be joined today by Kyle Hunter. You've seen him. He has a website, Kyle Hunter Sports, Kyle Hunter Picks, I should say. And he's on the internet giving out some great material as far as tutorials and picks, and you're on the Bet US show for the college football. And what I've known for the last year plus is how disciplined a handicapper you are. And so I really appreciate that when you have somebody who is patient in the field, pulls the trigger when everything's in the favor, but doesn't overdo it. So thank you so much for joining me today.
I'm glad to be here. Fun to talk about the Bengals. I'd be lying if I say I'm not still a little bit heartbroken that they came up just short here this year, but it's going to be fun to talk about this. A little bit of a respite from my looking at the 363 college basketball teams on the daily slates here throughout the season.
Yeah, good thing we didn't catch you on a Saturday because those games, that must be crazy, the Friday night and the Saturday with that.
Absolutely.
Well, you're attired in full Cincinnati Bengal uniform, and it's been a fascinating ride. Think back to a year ago at this time. If we were doing the show a year ago, the Cincinnati Bengals would be preparing for the Super Bowl. Something that at the beginning of 2021, people were more worried about who was going to be the next coach as opposed to whether or not they were going to go to the Super Bowl. But something clicked along the way. And even though there were holes on the roster, this Joe Burrow thing is really something. I know it didn't end well for Cincinnati in the Super Bowl, and they probably regret not doing more in the fourth quarter. But coming off the season, how did you feel after 2021?
Yeah, I mean, I felt good about the overall path of the team. I thought it would be difficult to get back to that position again. Obviously they had several things fall their way last year to win so many close games in the playoffs. I think going into this season, my question was, is this team good enough to not have that Super Bowl hangover from the loss? And I think they answered that one really well. This team, the way I would say it, even though they got one stage less this year, this was a better team than last year's team. I don't think there's any doubt about that. So the Bengals came back, outplayed what they did last year. A very good season for the Bengals in all, for sure.
Yeah. And I love that because the optimism with such a young team had to be outstanding. They didn't need to make a lot of offseason moves, but they had to make some very serious offseason moves, starting with the offensive line that absolutely needed to be upgraded. Everybody saw that in the 2021 playoffs. You can't get sacked 6, 7, 9 times and survive. And then they made their first 2 draft choices for the secondary, a little bit of succession planning, maybe for Jesse Bates, but also to get stronger in those 2 areas. What were your offseason thoughts regarding these upgrades and anything else that you had on Cincinnati's radar?
I thought the offensive line upgrades were the most necessary, and it was, this was the most obvious upgrade necessary. You don't have to be some expert of the Bengals to know that was absolutely what was needed. As far as the secondary, I think they did kind of foresee that there was going to be too high of a bill coming on some of those key guys in the secondary. I think the jury's kind of out on Hill as far as how good he'll be in the secondary. I think he'll be put in a lot bigger position very soon. So we're going to find out. But the Bengals did a good job. This is not a team with unlimited money, as some teams. They don't have the richest owners in the world. This is a Bengals team that does have to kind of play it safe, be a bit careful, and they know that there's a big bill coming up for some of these really good players. So I think they did a good job. I think Katie Blackburn's done a good job with the Bengals quite a bit since she's been there. So honestly, I think they're a much better run organization than they were a few years ago. That's really showing itself. And several of their drafts here recently have been very strong.
Yeah, you mentioned the drafts, and I tell you, I've been doing over 40 draft reports. And consistently, the Bengals outperform a significant part of the rest of the NFL. I mean, they're in the top 5 to 10. They're not usually in the top 3, but they're in the top 5 to 10 in drafting quite often. with one of the smallest drafting organizations as far as personnel in the organization. They don't have 40 guys in the war room or something like that. And you don't need more if you've got some smart guys in the building. One thing with free agency, which definitely addressed the offensive line, 3 upgrades there. I still thought they could have done a little bit more. I was looking at the Kansas City blueprint from the year before when they got exposed in their Super Bowl. They came back. They drafted 2 highly quality. I think they stole 2 offensive linemen, Kansas City, in that draft, and then they had those free agent pickups. I thought Cincinnati had a parallel path, but maybe could have done a little more. What were your thoughts there?
Yeah, Lyle Collins is kind of past his prime, and he didn't play extremely well this year, even before his injury. Honestly, he was one of the lower rated linemen in the NFL. So I think that one was not the best pickup ever. Not that it wasn't an upgrade, but not the best pickup ever. Alex Kappa is a good lineman, and I think it hurt them a lot when he went down. Ted Karras ended up being a really good leader for the offensive line, so I think that was solid. Cordell Volson, was he a fourth round pick, something like that, I
Yeah,
believe?
he was in the middle. Yes.
I mean, he was really thrown into the fire. Let's be honest. Fourth round pick from North Dakota State, thrown right into starting. I don't think he played that bad, considering where he was drafted, how he was up against some really good players in the AFC North on the defensive line. So, in general, I think they did a decent job of kind of patching up the offensive line. It could have been better. Long term, the other thing that they need to do is, obviously this is more obvious now, but they need to have a little bit better depth on the offensive line, because even some of those guys that went down, if you bring in like a Sharping or somebody like that Casey was really able to dominate consistently. It's going to be difficult if you don't have a little bit better depth than that, because offensive linemen, we do know that there are quite a few injuries on the offensive line throughout the course of the season in the NFL. So it's unlikely you're going to get everybody through the season. Now, this year was unfortunate for the Bengals because they had great health all the way through like week 15 on the offensive line. And that line was playing a lot better, much better. And then you lose 3 key guys right at the end of the season, which definitely showed up in the playoffs.
Yeah, that actually is a great point. It was just very unfortunate. You go through the entire season, and then when the biggest games are on the line, you have cluster injuries to one spot, and that is a problem. I'm going to read you a quote. This is how far the Bengal organization has come in my mind. I'm going to read you a quote from my own 2022 draft report. I want you to respond to that before we move on to 2022, the season itself. Here's what I wrote. The Bengals ended up in the Super Bowl with Chase as Offensive Rookie of the Year, and it was followed by an offseason where the NFL became obsessed with wide receivers through overpaying and overdrafting. The rest of the NFL wanted to follow the Bengals' lead. And I wrote then, it's surreal to write those sentences. The Bengals, I thought, were the leaders in terms of you add a Chase. They had a big decision to make when they chose Chase over the offensive lineman, and it's paid amazing dividends. And other teams are following the Bengals' lead now.
It's wild to think that we've come a long ways from the Bungles those days. Ron, I'll be honest. For a long time, I was made fun of for being a Bengals fan here in Ohio. It's like, oh my goodness, what are you doing? Even through school, it's like, oh, the Bengals fan, of course. This is an organization that's done much better. And I'm also going to call myself out. I thought they made a mistake when they drafted Chase over Sewell. I thought, man, we have to protect Joe Burrow. We just seen him get injured. It turns out, Burrow really wanted Chase. They have great connection. It has absolutely paid off in a big way. I think it is fascinating to see the Bengals kind of be the leaders in that path, instead of being the team where you would say you don't want to be the Bengals. So yeah, I agree with you. It's kind of a flipped setup from what it used to be.
When Chase was drafted, I wrestled with that for a long, long time. And finally, I came to one conclusion. There was going to be no wrong answer between the two. And it worked out for them. So at this point, I usually talk about my seasonal keys that I put on my team charts. Everything else is fairly blank, just some seasonal stuff that I have going on. And so right before the season starts, these are the things that I'm looking at. I'm going to read them off, the three of them, and have you comment on them and any other keys that you have. The first key is simple. Has Joe Burrow arrived? To me, he was my number 3 quarterback in the entire NFL going into 2022. Of course, he exits as the number 2, in my opinion. The second key was what were going to be reasonable expectations for the offensive line. Then, the benchmark was Kansas City. They had 5 completely new starters in 2021. It took them 8 games to get going. And once they got going, they were incredible. Would Cincinnati have that same arc? And then my third key was, in looking back to 2021, they faced a lot of quarterbacks, reserve quarterbacks that were hurt, other things. And now with a spike up of schedule, they were going to be playing a lot of top tier quarterbacks, at least outside of their own division. Maybe inside their own division, they got a little bit of a break, but they were going to play a lot of spike up in quarterbacks. Would they handle that? We know the answer now, but going into 2022, those were my keys. Comment on those and any other keys you had going into the season.
Yeah, I mean, going into the season, obviously felt great about Burrow being the quarterback. What a great leader. I agree with you as far as number 2 quarterback in the NFL. I think my question was, what was the upside of the offensive line? Kind of like you. I was wondering, was this a middle of the road offensive line, or was the upside even higher than that? I think time has shown that they didn't have the same upside that the Kansas City Chiefs had. The Chiefs' offensive line is fantastic now. I mean, that's a big reason why they are where they are. And the Chiefs' offensive line did a great job against the Bengals' defensive front, giving Mahomes time to throw when he was banged up there in that game. But I would say the other question I had about this team was the defense. Is the defense going to keep continuing on this positive path? Anarumo has done a tremendous job with the defense, and I know Anarumo might be gone any day now, and that would be one of my questions or concerns. So I won't jump ahead, but I think the defense had improved late last year to where I kind of wondered if this was going to be a continuing upward trajectory. I think time has proven that it has been the case. But, whether that will continue in the future or not. And then to me, the other one was Zach Taylor. Zach Taylor, he started out as a guy that it was really easy to say, look at this questionable decision by Zach Taylor on 4th down. And I was guilty of that at the beginning. The Bengals weren't a very good team when he first started there. And there was some questionable play calling. And it's like, what's Zach Taylor going to be? I thought this was really a big year for Zach Taylor to prove how good of a coach he is. As at the end of the year now, knowing what I do, I think he did a fantastic job. And I think he's probably underrated as a coach because, if you can get that kind of buy-in from a team and you can get guys to have the tremendous chemistry this Bengals team have. Everybody talks about how the Bengals, they're playing ping pong tournaments with each other. They're coming in early because they want to spend time with each other. If you can get that room of people to believe in you and what you're doing, that's the biggest key to start and with a team in the NFL. So I think my question marks about Zach Taylor were answered in a positive way.
Yeah, thank you so much for bringing him up. The organization is typically incredibly patient, especially with their money, but also with their personnel. So they're going to let contracts go, whereas other organizations may not have given Zach Taylor that extra year. I'm wondering, for the Chargers, for example, if they could learn from that, because I, like you, have been very impressed with Zach Taylor's overall leadership with this organization. I think that was a big point, and I'm glad you brought that up coming into this year. So I'm a guy who makes a lot of future plays, season wins, players, and so on and so forth. And I know you've done some as well. For Cincinnati, there were numerous, I hate to say this, and it is one of the teams that I got wrong. You can't get them all right, but we'll cover that in a few minutes. I had numerous reasons why I wasn't so high on the Bengals. Did you make any season win or future plays on the Bengals, or what were your thoughts in that area?
Yeah, going into the season, I didn't make any season win total plays on the Bengals. The schedule was really, really difficult for the Bengals, and that was one of the things that made them kind of be up against it. I remember their season win total was set at 9.5, even for a team that people thought was a solid team. It's just, are they going to be able to get through this gauntlet of a schedule? The only thing I did with the Bengals, and I wish I had put more on it, obviously, was after a couple of weeks, I did take them to win the AFC North at a plus money price of plus 300 or whatever it was at the time.
Wow, nice.
I didn't bet enough money on that, but I always am afraid to be a homer. You can cloud your view some. I did have a good read on this Bengals team throughout the course of the season. I'm a lower volume NFL guy. I bet a lot more college football games than I do NFL. But I did go 5-0 in Bengals bets on game by game basis throughout the course of the season. I bet on the Bengals 3 times and I bet totals twice. I did go 5-0 on those. That it was a Bengals team to me that it was fair to question them going into the season. It's fair to say, hey, they came up just short last year when nobody expected them to be there. Now they're the team that people are aiming for. How's it going to be flipped around? The way they lost those games early in the season is what made me think they still had a chance, because that game against the Steelers, they should have never lost that game. And you could get me started about this one.
Yeah.
They might have been in a different position if Burrow didn't have the appendix issue in the offseason,
Yeah.
to where, just about, I think he had half of his turnover worthy plays in the first 2 or 3 weeks of the season. That hurt them. No fault of his, certainly. And he had a tremendous season, but that hurt them. I think the fact that they lost only one game by more than a field goal all season kind of shows that they're going to be in nearly every game if Burrow's healthy. But I think it was fair to question them coming into the season. It's just they got stronger and stronger as the season went.
So full disclosure, because it's easy to gloat saying that I did this and I had this great season win and I had this great, whatever. But I also like to, say when I'm wrong on this. And so I'm going to list the reasons why I was bearish on them and why I took a season. Kyle, it opened at 10.5 Cincinnati. And
Wow.
that was that early value that I went after. So first of all, they were the Super Bowl loser, the hangover of that. That was one of the minor things that I would have considered. The Burrow appendix was a big deal. He obviously didn't get any snaps. The primetime schedule, Cincinnati used to 1 game in under the lights, now had 5 games under the lights. And on top of that, I thought the NFL did them a disservice by having 3 Sunday night road games. And I, the schedule makers try to make everything fair, but that's an extra burden on this particular team. The offensive line, just like Kansas City, I figured it was going to be a slow start out of the gate. It was a slow start out of the gate for a variety of reasons, but the offensive line needed time to gel, and we'll get into that. They certainly did gel as they went through. Massive schedule difference, especially considering Baltimore's schedule, 4th place schedule versus a 1st place schedule. And you mentioned health, and they were healthy a lot in 2022. They were the league's healthiest team in 2021, and sometimes that's a little bit random. They had 1 guy on IR until the end of the year. Then they had a 2nd guy on IR. And I thought, well, that's how they played, and they barely got in the playoffs, even though Joe Burrow is somebody special. I'm going to hate moving forward to go against Joe Burrow, but, he was battered and bruised. If we go through and we look at the early season, the first 2 games, he was sacked 13 times. 7 by Pittsburgh, 6 by Dallas, 2 losses. Like you mentioned, you pivoted after that, even before I did. All I saw right then is that the team wasn't quite ready and the schedule wasn't going to get any easier.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's all very fair. And it's easy to sit back here and say, look, they won 10 games in a row at the end of the season. But I think it's great to say, here's what I got right. Here's what I got wrong. I'm the same way. I try to be transparent. There's some things I get very wrong, and those, it's nice for people to be able to know that if you get it right, you'll say it. If you get it wrong, you're going to say it. The Bengals have had a an organization that hasn't really sustained success in the past. So it's easy to wonder if it'll be able to keep going. I think Joe Burrow makes it a decent amount different. And like I said, I think Zach Taylor is proving himself to be a really good coach, and that, I'm more confident of their path forward based on seeing how much these guys want to play for him.
Yeah. So they start 4-4, and they allow 30, I think it was 32 sacks in their first 8 games. That pace is going to get Joe Burrow killed one of these days. But then something happened for me weeks 9 and 10. I'm looking back at their schedule. They dominated Carolina, which doesn't sound like much on paper, but Carolina is a pretty good defensive team. They're well coached defensively. Things might have spiraled a little bit. There was a +3 turnover edge. But then they go into Pittsburgh week 10. They beat Pittsburgh at Pittsburgh. In those 2 games, Joe Burrow sacked a total of 4 times. For me, it's because you have a pulse on Cincinnati, you were able to pivot earlier. For me, at that moment, knowing what I knew about Baltimore not closing out games, and Lamar Jackson was still the starter at that time, and seeing an uptick for Cincinnati, that's when I moved on them. I think it was +225 to win the division, and still +170 to make the playoffs. I said, it's not just a hedge. Cincinnati is starting something these last 2 games. Anything stand out for you either in those games or earlier or later where you said, wait a second, Cincinnati is one of the top 5 teams
now? When I took them early in the season, I didn't necessarily think they were a top 5 team. I just thought that those odds were too long. I think the Steelers game was a great game to point out as far as a pivot, because the Steelers defensive line is so good at pressuring the passer. When Burrow did have time to throw in that game, and I don't remember the final score exactly, but that was a high-scoring game where the Bengals scored a lot of points to win.
37-30.
Yeah. So a very high-scoring game there at Pittsburgh. The fact that the Bengals could score that kind of point total on a Pittsburgh defense that may not be great in the secondary at this point. I know Fitzpatrick's great, but the depth there isn't tremendous. But the defensive line has consistently dominated the Bengals offensive front, and they didn't in that game. So I think that was a really key point in the season.
Yeah, so they have that 10-game winning streak, like you said, and it was kind of the way that they were carrying themselves for me. Joe Burrow expecting to win, the offensive line allowing, I believe it was 12 sacks the rest of the way. I may not have the game 17 data because it was kind of a meaningless game since the Baltimore, the playoff spots were locked in at that point. But just a tremendous job of the offensive line growing together and establishing the chemistry. Now, toward the end of the year, it got a little tricky. Obviously, they were on the field when Damar Hamlin had that unfortunate incident, and it affected both teams. You could see it. It wasn't just Buffalo. And Cincinnati needed to play a game or 2, in my opinion, get a game under their belt after that. I know it was revisiting that unfortunate situation, but I thought Cincinnati handled everything about that very, very well. Do you have any thoughts about that?
I think the fairest way to say that is I thought the Bengals showed a lot of class in that situation. I thought Zach Taylor really showed as a good human being in that situation, not just a good coach, and Burrow as well. Nobody did anything out of the way from the Cincinnati side. I thought they handled it as well as they possibly could. And then you go from that game, and like you said, you're kind of in just a really awkward position there, even really in the next couple games, because the first game after that, you're going to say, hey, this is going to feel a bit awkward, because the stadium was fired up for that Bills game on, I believe it was Monday night, right? So it was Monday night game. The Bengals started really well. They looked like they were ready to go in that game for sure. And then you go to the next game and you say, I wonder what this is going to be for the Bengals. And then, of course, you come with the situation of the whole coin flip and, the Bengals feeling slighted, which I understand. Maybe that's me being a Bengals fan, but I understand them feeling slighted. And then kind of playing with a chip on their shoulder. But, also mixed in there is that Bengals game against the Ravens, like you said, where that one game didn't mean anything, and then obviously they play the exact same team the next week, and it means a ton. And that was, to be fair, that was the Bengals' worst performance over the last several games. Was the Ravens probably should have beaten them in that playoff game. It was a great play by Logan Wilson to knock the ball loose there at the goal line. Hubbard gets all the glory for running it in, but that was a great play by Logan Wilson to knock it away.
Yeah, it was an awkward way to start the playoffs, but then the Bengals showed that they belong. I had a separated 5 teams. The Bengals were one of them. What were your takeaways from what could be a little bit of a bittersweet ending to the 2022 playoffs?
As a Bengals fan, my takeaways were I think their best, most complete game of the year was playing at Buffalo and winning that game the way they did. I think you could argue that the way they won the way they played the game in 27-10 isn't even as indicative of how big of a blowout that game was. I mean, the Bengals really dominated the Bills. I thought that Chase touchdown was probably a touchdown that was reversed. And that would have been 31-10. Obviously, the Bengals offensive line played well in that game, even though they had those 3 new guys on the line. The thing I hated as a Bengals fan was the flip from the team having a chip on their shoulders to the team talking trash going into the next week. Mainly Eli Apple, to be fair, and then the mayor of Cincinnati, of all people.
Oh, boy.
I mean, what on earth was the mayor of Cincinnati? I don't have any control over this, but hopefully the mayor of Cincinnati gets some kind of message from that, because whether it be from the voters or whoever, that was just a ridiculous move. Why give a team like the Chiefs any extra ammo? I mean, they've been so good already. I think the Bengals were at their best when they were the underdog with a chip on their shoulder. Now, going into the game where you start talking about Burrowhead, which, he'd won one game at Arrowhead, and even the games that they beat the Chiefs, all 3 games, they were right down to the wire. It could have gone either way every single time. So that made me pretty uncomfortable. And then the way it finished, obviously, the Bengals didn't play great against the Chiefs, especially at the start of the game. They did fight back. They had a chance. It was 2020, their ball. It was right there for them. I know Osai made that late hit out of bounds. I feel bad for Osai because so many people put so much on him. It really was far more than him hitting Mahomes out of bounds there. And I know he felt terrible about that afterwards. But the Bengals had some poor calls go against them against the Chiefs. And I'm not saying I'm this conspiracy guy that it was just scripted that they were going to lose from the beginning, but definitely some poor calls in that game. At the same time, the Bengals didn't really play well enough to win that game either. It was also on them that they didn't play their best football. I think some people's takeaway, you always see these hot takes after the game, Ron. It's some of those people that just want to hate somebody, some of these people that say, oh, this team's won 10 games in a row. They just so badly want to hate Burrow or something, Hey, here's Burrow with his chance and it's 20-20. He doesn't take his team down the field. He was fraudulent, like I thought. Some of the takeaways I see on Twitter are just ridiculous. I mean, we saw with our eyes, how much pressure he was getting on him every single time. It was not easy. He's not sitting back there waiting like Mahomes was, having all day to throw. Burrow was getting rid of the football really quickly, and he was still getting hit pretty often in that game. So I think, it's a tough way to end the season for the Bengals, but I assume the team as a whole would be encouraged also by the way they played, kind of when their backs were against the wall, because at one point in the season, it looked like they wouldn't even make the playoffs, obviously. And then they make this really good run and look like, one of the teams to beat. And now they kind of set themselves up, I think, with that play as a team that, most people are going to see for the next few years as one of the teams to beat in the AFC.
Yeah, you mentioned sustainability, and I think we've hit that point with Cincinnati now that is absolutely possible. It's tough because the entire NFL community knew that Cincinnati could have had better calls in that game. I mean, it was just unfortunate that comes to the light of day in a playoff game after such a marvelous playoff season the year before, and it's been a little bit tainted, especially in both championship games for various reasons this time around. My takeaways. Joe Burrow was under tremendous pressure, whereas Kansas City wasn't. Unfortunately, Cincinnati has to revive its pass rush. 26 defensive
Absolutely.
sacks in the first 16 games just isn't enough. I saw enough about Joe Burrow that I have no qualms about him, of course. But yeah, they could do a little bit better in some of these fourth quarters. Just maybe once they're in the lead, just finish the job a little bit, but that might be nitpicking just a little bit in terms of that. A really good season for them. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I think I agree with that point too. I think they might get a bit too conservative sometimes in the fourth quarter. The things that were working in the first, second, and third quarters, obviously you alluded to it earlier too. Last year in the Super Bowl, they had so many chances already ahead with the ball, and they got 3 and outs or very short time. They really put a lot of pressure on the defense in that game. So hopefully they get a little bit more aggressive with the lead. But yeah, a great season from the Bengals, and it's hard to take away anything other than feeling pretty good about the future as a Bengals fan, certainly.
So 2 or 3 more questions regarding what's next. First of all, obviously you have a defensive coordinator who orchestrated the number 1 defense in the league against the pass via percentage, under 59% for the regular season, which in this day and age of all these RPOs and protecting the quarterback and so on, where we used to see 7, 8, 9 teams under 60%, there were only 2 this year, and Cincinnati was the leader. So you have that to worry about. And I have another question for you. Handle them both. Do you keep Joe Mixon?
So I would not keep Joe Mixon. I'll answer that one first. And it's not because I don't like Joe Mixon or I don't think he's a quality player. The money that they're paying Joe Mixon is going to have to be spent somewhere else, in my opinion. And I also think that we saw enough this season that Ryan did fine there at running back that I think first, Ryan's a better pass blocker than Mixon is. You need somebody in the backfield who's going to be able to protect Burrow as well if the offensive line is going to be better than they are. So, whether it be Ryan or somebody that's even better as a pass protector, I think that would be an option. I don't think they can pay huge money to a running back, especially when in the biggest games, the Bengals have consistently thrown the ball, 70 some percent of the plays. They're not really turning around and handing it off anyways. So I don't think you can spend that kind of money. As I said, it's not really a slight on Mixon as much as it is just knowing the money has to be spent somewhere else soon and very soon here. What was the other question, Ron? I'm thinking too much.
Oh, it's mainly about the defensive coordinator, where you see that going, or, what's next if he does leave?
I think I wanted to forget that one because I'm worried about that. Anarumo's done a fantastic job. Probably, it's important to point out too that Awuzie was their best cornerback by miles, and he got injured not even halfway into the season. And then you have guys out there consistently. Eli Apple hasn't proven to be that good over the course of his NFL career, but in this defense, he did fine. I think Anarumo did a great job putting people in the right place. I'm very concerned for him leaving. Honestly, I think that's my biggest concern for the Bengals going forward. That would be number 1 on my list is, can you get somebody if he's gone that'll fill in at least adequately? I think there's going to be some drop off regardless. Now, I do think they have good young players on defense. You have Logan Wilson, you have DJ Reader. Reader's fantastic stuff in the run. You get guys like that. You get Awuzie back. I do think this is a good defense, but Anarumo, we saw many times the halftime adjustments. What was it, 7 or 8 weeks into the season, they hadn't given up a touchdown in the second half. That says a lot about the coaching. And I'm highly concerned about Anarumo leaving for sure.
I think Eli Apple, I think they got the most that any team can get out of Eli Apple. I think you have to have strong people around him. I don't know the situation, so I'm going to ask you, is Jesse Bates, it seemed like a year ago he was going to be one and done, that they were planning for the future. Is there a chance they keep him?
I think chances are pretty low they keep Jesse Bates. I think he's going to require too much money or ask too much money for what the Bengals will be able to afford to pay, especially when you think about all the other guys that they're going to have to pay. I think Bates is a good player. I really do. But I think even in some of his comments after the game, he kind of hinted at that he hated that it was over here in Cincinnati.
Yeah.
He enjoyed his time. It didn't sound like a guy who thought he would be back.
Cincinnati they used to be on the police blotter week after week after week. We used to play, my friend Ted and I, there used to be a prop offshore in the month of January. Would there be a Cincinnati Bengal be arrested? And we would always play yes. But this is a different team. People should want to go play for Joe Burrow. They're an easy team to root for. I find myself rooting for them, even when I might have a play against them. So, Kyle, to wrap this up, what are your final thoughts as far as Cincinnati? I'm proud Cincinnati fan, and you should be. What are your final thoughts here?
Yeah, final thoughts. What's this team going to look like in the next couple of years compared to what they have been? They have so many contracts that are going to be coming due. I would assume they'll try to work an extension with Burrow ASAP because it wouldn't make any sense to wait. Chase will stay. I'm pretty sure they're just going to pay those two guys. That's going to be hard to keep paying everyone. I know there's been talk about Higgins already. Higgins' height really helps them a lot. As the young kids nowadays say, he mosses a lot of people. That's for sure.
Oh, okay.
With his high pointing the ball. Ron, my son, who's 9, is always so excited when Higgins catches one over somebody. He goes, "Oh, they're mossing! He's mossing!" So no, I think the Bengals will be a very good team as long as Joe Burrow's healthy. They obviously have no other option as far as backups. If Burrow gets hurt, that's it. The Bengals are in deep trouble. But if they can keep him healthy, if the offensive line can play even decent, they don't have to be tremendous on the offensive line. They just have to be at least mediocre. Then I think this Bengals team has a bright future ahead of it. I'm going to throw this back on you real quick here, Ron, if that's okay. Can I ask you a question?
All Absolutely.
Right. So I'm wondering, what odds would you put on the Bengals winning a Super Bowl at some point in the next, we'll say, 8 years?
Okay. Well, right now you're talking about an unbelievably loaded AFC. Every young quarterback that's good is there. If you consider them one of the top 5 teams and they rotate, I'd say the odds of getting back to a Super Bowl are far better than even money. So the odds of winning the Super Bowl boy, that's a tough, that's a franchise changer like Buffalo. When can we win one? We don't want to just get there. Let me say it would still be plus money, but I would make it like plus 150 kind of thing. Joe Burrow is that good.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I would have said they should be a favorite to get back to a Super Bowl. To win a Super Bowl probably would be plus money, plus 140 or 150. So we're thinking along the same lines here. So yeah, I think
quite alignment.
Yeah, and I think the other point you mentioned it. I should say the same thing. The defensive line needs to be better with the pass rush, and I think that's something they really do need to get after here in the next year or two. Is realizing that they can't always be the team that is at a disadvantage when it comes to the other teams able to get after Burrow. They got to be able to do the same thing the other way. So that's one way that they could make themselves a lot better and also put less pressure on that secondary that will probably be without Bates and maybe without Anarumo as well.
Yeah, good points. They know what it's like when their own quarterback is rushed. Turn the tables and make sure you have that too. You can never have enough pass rushers. Kyle, I really appreciate you coming on. It's always fun to talk to you. I know we've been on some other things. I'm glad to have you this way because you're just so level-headed about all this. Tell the audience where they can find you because you're still busy. College basketball is crazy.
Yeah, definitely still busy. College basketball takes the most time of any sport I do. So as much as I love college basketball, I do kind of look forward to the end of the season because it's a slower period after that. But then, it's going to be getting ready for next football season. Football kind of never stops. There's always going to be a lot of off-season prep going into that. I always look forward to that as well, though. Thanks for having me on here, Ron. You can definitely check out my work at huntersportspicks.com and at Kyle Hunter Picks on Twitter. You can always reach out to me through Twitter or through my website if you have any questions as well. I'm always happy to help if I can.
Thank you so much. You and I, it's the off season where we do a lot of our work so that we're ready and we're not stressed during the season. That's it for this one for the Cincinnati Bengals. I have two more to do in the AFC North. Rivals of Cincinnati, rivals of Baltimore, teams that hope to be joining the party, Pittsburgh and Cleveland. Those will be coming up a little bit later in the week. So thank you again, and we'll talk to you down the road.